Conservative wave.
Greetings, conservatives.
Wave.
This is your humble host, John Moraga, and we are back with more ConservaCast. We look forward to keeping you informed with the latest and most relevant commentary of conservative issues. So without further ado, here are a few topics I'd like to discuss.
Conservative wave. Hey folks, I have a lot on my mind today, and if you'll permit me, I'm just going to go for the stream of conscience. So sit back and relax, you may just enjoy this one. To begin, I want to make a distinction between conservatism and republicanism. That has to be qualified. Now, what I mean is that what's happened in this most recent midterm elections can kind of muddy the waters in what we understand in some of these terms. The association between conservatism and republicanism gets really blurred in political commentary. You see pundits on the air, you hear pundits on the radio or different vlogs, and they become synonymous. But in reality, there are some distinctions that should be observed between what we understand as conservatism and republicanism, or what we understand as the conservative philosophy and the Republican Party. Now, all of this talk about a blue wave, a red wall, or whatever terms of art people have tried to use, it masks some of those distinctions. And I want to call on every conservative out there who can hear my voice to take part in a conservative wave. I'll be mentioning that term quite a bit. And I want to reiterate that this is more of a stream of conscience, so try and pick up on some of the key points that I'm talking about as I ramble on here a bit. The main point that I'm trying to get across is that there is a responsibility that we have as conservatives to take action. Post this midterm, we should be motivated. We should be encouraged. We should be on fire. Why? Because we have a defined political philosophy. We understand what our values are. We understand what we're fighting for. And unfortunately, a lot of people who play the political party game are just like a bunch of people at a sports arena or a football stadium, where you may not necessarily have an invested interest in any one particular outcome, but you're just rooting for the team, or you're just trying to buy a jersey, and you invest all this money into a corporation of a sports team, and in the end, you're not really served any better. And so, unfortunately, that's really how this political game works. You have the Democrats and the Republicans, and they're on opposing sports teams. And it's more of a groupthink. You don't really analyze what the issues are. You don't really take into account. When I say you, I'm talking about the vast majority of people who play this game. And that's why I'm trying to encourage conservatives who do take the time, who do have an understanding of the issues and have a concern of the outcome of these things, to get up, and even though there was what was considered a loss for Republicans in the House, and I'm going to address that outcome of the midterms here in just a moment, but I want to start off by making the distinction that it wasn't the conservatives who may have lost or won necessarily, as much as the different parties and how they operate in this whole system. So all of that being stipulated, I do want to give some analysis of what's happened in this most recent midterm elections. Now, forgive me if I fall into the trap of maybe blurring those lines and doing what I'm criticizing others of doing. But unfortunately, that is part of how people understand some of this commentary. And so I will try to make some conscious awareness of how I phrase certain things. And to clarify, there are a lot more commonalities between conservatism and the Republican Party than there are between conservatism and the Democrat Party. That's understood, and I will give credit where credit is due. But there is enough of a distinction that we should take account of that and allow it to give us motivation to organize and to take part in what I'm terming a conservative wave. So here's what's happened, and my take on the outcome of the midterms. The Republicans had a much better night than some would give credit for, unless you are a Republican or a pundit who tries to paint a much better picture than what would be otherwise considered. Now, to be objective, the Democrats had a pretty good night as well. But I think, as many others have observed, their blue wave, as they tried to call it, really dissipated. And it dissipated probably about a month prior to this actual election. Now, as many have said, the main cause of that was their resistance to Judge Kavanaugh's confirmation in the Senate. They overplayed their hand when they tried to get so many people or so many women to try and testify against him, and it became more of a circus show and attacked his character more than it did try and bring some light to some actual offenses that he may have committed. And so instead of it rallying people, independent thinkers or those who don't associate with any certain party, rather than it encouraging them to join their side in their cause, it turned off many people. Or at the very least, it didn't have the effect that they wanted. And so although, at least initially, they were gaining some steam in their anti-Trump sentiments, they really lost a lot of ground. And so as a result, they not only didn't have a blue wave, they wound up not getting the number of seats that they wanted in the Senate. And some of those specific races I won't give commentary to. It will take far too much time to analyze each and every race. So I'm just giving more of a generalization of what I think has happened. The Senate not only stayed in the control of the Republicans, they actually picked up a few seats. And we won't know some of these results for some time, but we have about, maybe 85 to 90% of the results in it. So we have a pretty good idea of where the different chambers of the Congress are being controlled and how they're by what party they're being controlled by. The House of Representatives was taken over by the Democrats, but not nearly by the margin that they may have wanted or predicted. And there were some signs that they were trying to soften their gloating leading up to the election, and they've had their victory lap that they've taken. Nancy Pelosi is more than likely will be the next Speaker of the House again, as she was during George W. Bush's term. And that is where we look as a split Congress. The Republicans retained a majority in the U.S. Senate, and the Democrats have regained their slight majority in the House of Representatives. Now, I can't emphasize what this actually means, the smaller margin than they anticipated in the House of Representatives. There is already a lot of commentary. I'm not the only one to observe this. But what I think, observing is the opportunity that we have as conservatives to make the Republican Party even more conservative, to pressure Republicans and representatives to take on even more conservative issues. What I mean is, there is a lot for Republicans and the bigger party to look at as gains. I think it was a far better night for Republicans than Democrats, objectively. Because historically, as you may have been told by other commentators, the House of Representatives historically does get taken over by the party who is not in power. So in this case, the Republicans, by President Trump being a registered Republican and governing as such, as he claims, and the U.S. Senate, as well as the House of Representatives, were all controlled by the Republican Party for the first 2 years of his President Trump's terms in office. And because of that, historically, it was projected that he would lose the House of Representatives, much like Barack Obama lost the House of Representatives after his first 2 years in office. And so without having a whole history lesson, the point is that historically, it's almost guaranteed that the party in power will lose at least the House of Representatives after the first 2 years of being in power. So if we stipulate that that was already a projection, if we understand that that was already a foregone conclusion, then we have to look at the finer print, read between the lines, if you will. How big of a margin did they lose that? Well, oftentimes they have even lost the Senate. In this case, the Republicans retained the Senate and actually picked up a couple seats. So by retaining and picking up a couple seats, that was very good for their efforts in this election. By losing the House, as historically the trend, they didn't lose it by nearly as big of a margin as the Democrats were projecting. So it's kind of like the Democrats didn't really have something to gloat over or to brag about, because it's kind of like saying, yeah, we're going to win something that historically has always been won, irrespective of whatever president is in office. So they can't really, I don't believe, make this a rallying cry for their constituents to go against President Trump and say, oh, yes, you lost the House because there's so many people who disagree with you and who hate you and who are part of the Never Trump movement still. So in my opinion, this was a far better night for the Republicans than the Democrats, even though the Democrats won the House of Representatives. Now, this is why it gets very, very tricky, and I hope you follow me on this. The Democrats are inevitably going to make a rallying cry out of winning back the House. And rightfully so. They're going to be able to claim some type of victory, some type of pat on the back for each other for winning these races that allow them to take control of the House. But underneath that, because the Republicans still had, I believe, a better night, I think we should use that as capital. I think we should try and force the Republicans to say, between now and the 2020 election, when President Trump tries to get reelected, because irrespective of what you may feel about President Trump, he more than likely is going to be around to run for his reelection. What I mean be around is he's still probably going to be in good enough health that he will choose to run for re-election. And because of that, the Republicans as a political machine are going to be his supporters. And by default, that will be essentially the only legitimate or realistic machine that conservatives can actually influence. Because it's not even a reasonable thought that conservatives would be able to influence Democrats. They're so far left now that's not even a possibility. And in fact, the Republican Party has moved even more quote unquote moderate or liberal than we would like, and so it's difficult to even influence them. But because they are a vehicle to which we can try and influence, I want to urge every conservative to seize this moment. Organize, contact your representatives, your congressmen who may have even barely won, or who might be running again in 2020, or a person who we don't even know about. Find out who will be running in 2020. Find out who is going to organize for 2020. And get an early start. Make them promise and make certain moves to be more conservative. Contribute to conservative politicians who are going to be on the ballot, who are going to try and run, so that between now and 2020, there is a whole pool of Republicans who are far more conservative than they are now. Because if they're going to, as a party, organize and go full steam ahead to get President Trump reelected, we want to have the most conservative candidates ready to go out the door. And so that's why I'm calling this a conservative wave. What is a kind of behind the scenes, underground movement to try and encourage conservative Republicans to get active, to get involved, to take office in 2020. And we need to do this now. We need to make a concerted effort to be even more on fire than we have been in the past. Because this was a really good night for Republicans, in part because I believe conservatives did go out and help them. Even though they weren't successful in retaining the House, again, because that's historically a foregone conclusion that they would have lost the House, the Senate was retained and increased. And that is, in my opinion, because of the conservative vote that did finally come around to trying to support President Trump. Now, that in and of itself is another commentary that I'll give as far as how a proportion or percentage of conservatives have held their nose to support President Trump, even if they didn't vote for him. That is an anomaly that will, again, as I said, be discussed at another point. But there is a large enough percentage of conservatives who got behind this midterm election in order to try and make some difference, which allowed them to then keep the Senate and increase seats. And so if there is even if it's already assumed that President Trump will be running for re-election in 2020, there's also going to be other senators running. There's also going to be other congressmen running as well. And we need to get them in place. And even if they're already in office, we need to influence the agenda. We need to influence the issues that they take up. We need to be far more vocal and influential in our opinions and our voices. Even if you feel that you have been already, it doesn't stop now. That's why I'm calling this a conservative wave. The underground conservative wave that is brewing and ready to get up into a tsunami needs to start now. It needs to 1 inch, 1 foot, 10 feet of an increase of water, of a water tide raising to get this wave, so that by a month, a year from now, we have enough organization and influence that in 2 years from now, when the elections come around, assuming we won't have our ideal candidate running for president, because it'll be President Trump at the top of the ticket, we need to have some of the lower tickets and some of the issues being brought up. Not just the candidates, but the issues. What are we speaking of as far as fiscal, social, foreign policy issues? We need to be far more motivated from this midterm election than we have ever been. So the idea that when I say we, I'm saying some conservatives who got behind some of the candidates this time around, we need to be even a bigger percentage of that. Imagine if there was even a bigger conservative movement brewing. They could have theoretically kept the House of Representatives. But there are enough conservatives who are still very never-Trumpers, who have, understandably so, I'm not criticizing them, I'm just talking numbers. I'm talking the overall game strategy, so to speak. If there were enough of those never-Trumper conservatives who have issues with a number of different politicians who feel that they've sold out, if those people had come out to vote, I believe the Republicans would have very easily kept the House of Representatives. And so I'm trying to encourage those who didn't come out to vote or who decided to vote for a different candidate because of their political stances to consider what influence we can have for 2020. I hope I'm articulating what I'm thinking about this. If that percentage of the citizenry, of the population, of the American population, had been motivated to go out and vote and flex their influence and who was nominated and who got elected, do you realize how much more we could have proven to the quote-unquote establishment, the Republican Party as a whole, to say we are a big enough percentage of the voting bloc that you need to start listening to us. You need to start acting as we have been urging you to for so long. And so if we get ahead of the game now, if we get ahead of these candidates running, because they're going to, the establishment is starting to go through auditions, through interviews, through, the first round of, okay, well, who's going to be out there? And when people start getting filtered out, it's a whole dirty, messy game in politics. I've been part of a number of different campaigns. I've seen the behind the scenes of how these things operate. And for better or for worse, it's a really complicated, intricate game. And so a lot of it does rest on how motivated each candidate is and how much support they have, even from the very beginning of an election cycle. And so 2020 started a few hours ago. I mean, in my opinion, I think it started even 2 years ago when President Trump was elected. But it's now basically, this is the full-fledged, we're now in nitro mode. 2020 is already here. We need to start thinking as though we're only a month or two away from the 2020 elections. Because of that, we need to start organizing. We need to get on fire and make our voices known. There is so much more we can do. In fact, just one quick tangent here. There were so many times. I'm in California, and recently there was a bill, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was Assembly Bill 2943, which was supposed to, I talked about this on another vlog before, but it was supposed to ban what was considered conversion therapy. Now, whether you're a religious person or have different views about same-sex marriage or same-sex attraction, just on a constitutional free speech basis, religion aside, morals aside, ethics aside, and I shouldn't say morals and ethics, religion aside, your religious beliefs aside, there was a legal, constitutional, philosophical reason why we should have not supported that bill. And miraculously, it was ultimately pulled by the author who had authored the bill in the California Assembly. But that was only because there was enough pressure, there was enough influence when conservatives had gathered, when conservatives had organized, petitioned, called, different people had communicated with the author of the bill, that he eventually folded and pulled the bill. However, if we consider the history of similar bills that had come before that, there were already a number of them that had passed. And they only passed because conservatives didn't organize. Conservatives were apathetic to what these efforts were. They were either uninformed, apathetic, or just a combination of the two. But there were a number of other bills very similar to that. And if I didn't make it clear, it would have basically banned and made illegal any type of commercial transaction that would have offered services to any services of quote-unquote conversion therapy, meaning the bill would have made it illegal to try and offer services or help to somebody who may have been struggling with same-sex attraction and given them help to resist those attractions. Now, again, your religious beliefs aside, just making it illegal to have that communication and a transaction is unconstitutional. It infringes on our speech, on our freedom of religion, on our freedom of assembly, and just so many different levels. It was just wrong. So that being said, there were other bills very similar to that passed only because conservatives or people of moral, religious standing didn't organize, didn't come together. Now, that aside, I'm just using it as an example as to how when we do organize, when we can get motivated, when we can get fired up about an issue or a person or some type of legislation, we can have an influence. Don't think that you can't. And it's time that even if we lose certain battles here, certain battles there, we have to keep fighting. We have to keep the wave coming up. So I am motivated from this midterm election that with what is considered a loss for Republicans in the House is a very strong indicator that it actually really wasn't a loss for Republicans, even though the media will frame it as such. And so the actual victory for Republicans is an actual incentive and bigger victory for conservatives, because it's like there's layers of victory. If there's a subtle victory for Republicans, there would have been a huge victory for them had conservatives given them even a bigger push. And so if we can give them an even bigger push in 2020 by forcing them to be more conservative, by holding them accountable. Now, I know what a lot of people are going to say. If you're a student of history or if you've been part of this movement for some time, it's very easy to point to, well, we can make them do things, but then they'll go to Washington and not keep their promises. Look at what happened with 2010. If you remember the whole Tea Party movement that had come and gone and it's kind of fizzled out, there's still people who are out there who kind of wave that or fall under that banner, and more power to them. Again, I'm not criticizing them, but a lot of them have rightfully been disillusioned because they see what empty promises the Republicans have given lip service to. But that doesn't mean we stop. That doesn't mean we give up. We need to be just as determinate and just as on fire as a lot of, even more so than these kooks on the left, than these very radical liberal ideologists who are pushing the Democratic Party so far to the left that that's why conservatives can't even work with them, can't even try and compromise or influence them, because they have been pulled so far to the left. We need to counter that with being even more motivated to encourage Republicans to steer the ship the other way. Even if it's a hard steer, even if they refuse to go at times, we need to keep pushing. We need to keep turning that wheel to the right and keep it on course, because it's going so far to the left. Now, the problem is, why I made the distinctions in the beginning, is that what people are seeing as a Republican victory in the Senate, what people can point to as a Republican victory overall in these midterms, is not necessarily a conservative victory. It's important to understand that. The Republican victories are not necessarily conservative victories. Let me say that one more time. The Republican victories are not necessarily conservative victories. And that's my whole point. Okay. I didn't mean to ramble on as long as I did, but as I said on the offset of this, I had a lot on my mind, a stream of conscience, just to get all that out. I hope you were able to follow a lot of what I was saying. I hope it wasn't too fast, it wasn't too convoluted, or too redundant, too repetitive. But there is a need, bottom line, for conservatives to be motivated. There is a reason for us to organize for what I've termed a conservative wave. Folks, I've been around long enough. I'm not as old as some, but I'm definitely a lot older than others. And I haven't been involved as much in politics as some, but I've definitely been involved in politics more than others. And so I can definitely speak to a lot of hands-on, a lot of studying of these trends and patterns. And for better or for worse, we have a two-party system. Now, I know that upsets a lot of conservative party hardliners, a lot of independent party people, a lot of Constitution Party people, and there was some time for a while that I was very much a staunch third-party person, because it is frustrating to see how groupthink the two parties act, how much of a two-sport game they think this is. But after going to Israel a couple times and studying some of the multi-party governments around the world and seeing how they function, I've gained a bit of an appreciation for the two-party system. Not that it is perfect by any means, but when we consider the alternative of having a multi-party system, in my opinion, in my experience, it's even less ideal. It's even less desirable. And without getting into a side conversation on that, the point is we have to work with what we have, as much as in life. The older you get, the more you realize that at times you won't have the ideal situation. Whether it's just in your own family, with your spouse, with your children, with your work, with whatever it is around you, you don't always have the ideal situation. I learned that very quickly by being in the military. Again, not another tangent to go on, but you learn very quickly. You have to work with the situation you have. You're not going to have the ideal situation. You're not going to have the ideal tools to work with. And so it becomes necessary that when we evaluate the tools that we have, when we do evaluate what is in front of us, how best can we work with it? That has been kind of the logic of some conservatives who have tried to work with President Trump, understanding that he is inevitably the person in that office, and he has claimed to be part of the Republican Party, and the Republican Party has historically been the more conservative liberty party. That is the vehicle that conservatives have with which to work. And so it becomes necessary for us to understand, rather than trying to recreate the wheel, how can we put tires on it? How can we make it run more smoothly? How can we increase the treading on the wheel? So when we consider how we need to move forward from here, don't consider what the pundits are saying is a conservative, or rather, excuse me, what pundits are saying is that would be true. When you hear pundits say that this is a good day for conservatives, I don't know who may say that or how often they may say that, but by all means, don't buy into it. Take what's happened from this midterm and find out who will be running in your local congressional district. Who will be running in your local city council? Who will be running in your local area, as well as obviously statewide? who's going to be bidding for the primary in your in any type of Senate seat that may be up wherever you live. I mean, obviously, I'm here in California. There's there's only so many options, and so that's why I'm focusing on more things on things more locally. So, just to give a few final thoughts on where I'm going with this, the idea that we organize and keep our heads focused on our ideals, on our values. Don't get bombarded by the pundits, right or left. Whether it's on CNN, whether it's on Fox News, whether it's on independent media sources, don't fall for the groupthink. The Republican machine is just as guilty as the Democrat machine when they try and manipulate what you're thinking, how you are going to think, and what you might want to do in supporting people or ideas or legislation. Don't fall for the groupthink. Stay focused, stay motivated, and by all means, please join me. Join Conservatives' Corner in this conservative wave. Please get that out there. I don't think anybody else has started to get that term out there, but hopefully we will get that out there as a trending term. And maybe if you want to hashtag that or post it somewhere, but just get that out there, a conservative wave. Yes, folks, don't fall for the groupthink. Get behind the conservative wave. Well, folks, I don't want to keep repeating myself or being redundant of what I'm talking about, but I do appreciate you listening.
If you haven't already, please check us out at GoFundMe.com/Conservatives Corner. GoFundMe.com/Conservatives Corner. Once again, that's GoFundMe.com/Conservatives Corner. Thanks for joining us once again, and we hope you will invite your friends and family to join us in our efforts to champion conservatism for generations to come.
But it would be nothing, not a woman or a girl.